I think we'll start this morning with confessions. All right, pay attention. How many of you have now or at some other time spent more time than you care to admit watching reality TV? Show of hands. Now, come on. Nobody in the choir, huh? No? Okay. We'll talk later. You do. Good deal. I have to confess that I'm hooked on a couple of the reality programs. This year I found a group of programs about state game wardens. I thoroughly enjoyed following the game wardens from Texas and Louisiana and Maine as they upheld the regulations, helping people out and the wildlife they were charged with protecting. Additionally, Boo and I have enjoyed watching the reality show Alone. It's where a group of self-proclaimed survival specialists are dropped off in a really remote place to live off the land for as long as they can, and thus try to be the last one left, as others call in to be picked up or are medically disqualified. One of the struggles that affected every contestant in the Alone series is the struggle of living into the title of the program, the struggle of being alone. Being separated from friends and family, being separated from human contact for an extended period of time, maybe even several months. Even the strongest of the competitors felt this longing for the personal contact. See, that personal contact is so important for our living. And while there have been and always will be those who choose to cut themselves off from others, most of us go just a little batty when we are cut off from others. It doesn't require too much effort to remember how so many of us felt during 2020 as we struggled to adjust to the concept of social distancing, and as we struggled to adjust our patterns of living within the reality that was the COVID pandemic. And through the time of COVID, even with our social distancing, we recognize that our own family relationships could not be put on hold. Whether it was a teething infant, a tantrum-tossing toddler, a teenager tirade, a serious illness within the family, or an aging parent, or any number of other challenges, we are all called to deal with our family situations as best we can in the real time of our living. Those with whom we have true connection don't get our attention just when it's convenient. That's what makes us family, and that is the reality of our living. But even as we talk about reality in our lives, we must admit that Jesus' parable in this week's gospel text is almost too much for our ears to hear, almost too much for the real challenge that it offers. It is easy to read about a rich, self-absorbed, politically important man who is so involved in his own life, so busy orchestrating his own pleasures and perks, that he completely ignores the plight of Lazarus, a man who falls inside his gate, but far outside his pay grade. But this is not the shock treatment that Jesus' parable is administering, for Jesus does not portray some ultimate rich bad guy tossing poor Lazarus to the curb. Instead, Jesus offers a picture of first century socially acceptable compassion extended by this incredibly wealthy man to an incredibly unacceptable person. The rich man described in this parable is very, very rich. The purple, the linen, the daily feasts, the exclusive gate, all these elements sketch out an extremely wealthy individual, someone who was Elon Musk rich, Jeff Bezos rich, maybe even Saudi prince rich. And yet he allowed Lazarus to take up a daily residence at the entrance of his property. He was probably congratulated on his generosity in not having Lazarus run off. Jesus insisted such was not enough. The problem was the rich man's actions did not involve any kind of relationship. For the Pharisees who were listening to and then publicly ridiculing Jesus' teachings, this was an unexpected assault upon their self-important righteousness. This man was not behaving badly. He was doing good according to the letter of the law. And according to the divine bookkeeping that these critics of Jesus kept, The very fact that the rich man was blessed with wealth and with social acceptance and with comfort and power were all tangible signs of God's approval and acceptance, both of his life and his lifestyle. The fact that Lazarus was poor was not a judgment, but his physical disabilities were calculated as an indictment. Illness, infirmity were read as signs of God's judgment. And yet the rich man was the one who ended up in Hades. How did this happen? How could this happen? Well, the rich man in Jesus' parable did not end up outside of heaven because of disrespect, but because of neglect. The rich man provided charity, a safe place to be, some protection, some food, but the rich man did not offer any of himself to Lazarus. There was no human connection between Lazarus and the rich man. There was no reaching out. There was no real relationship. And above all else, Jesus' call to love, Jesus' call to mission, Jesus' call to all of us is a call to be in relationship with God and with each other. The ones we know well and the ones we might prefer not to know at all. And while it is easy to write a check in support of the other, the one who is not necessarily like us, that offering is an important part of our lives and our missions together. The truth is that we are called to do more, to be more. I know it's hard to check up on people you don't really know, but here we see in Jesus' parable the condemnation of this archetypal rich man, not for the sin of greed, but for the sin of not giving any part of himself. Remember what torments the rich man in Hades. But besides the flames, he's tormented by the pending fate of his 5 brothers. The problem, as Jesus sees it, is that the rich man doesn't see that he has 6 brothers, not just 5. For Jesus, it's not enough for the rich to visit the poor and ladle out charity. Jesus wants us to be in a relationship with the poor, to make Lazarus our brother. Jesus wants us to be in relationship, always. Jesus wants the rich man to be in a loving, compassionate relationship with Lazarus in the same way the rich man was in a loving, compassionate, concerned relationship with his own siblings. Lazarus should not have been just a charity project. Lazarus should have been the rich man's 6th brother. Lazarus should have been seated at the table, not at the gate. And those are tough words for the Pharisees to hear. It is just as hard on our ears too. Jesus' parable is far more challenging and surprising than the story of a rich man who shirks his duty to give alms. This parable is an arrow to the heart of all of us who would prefer to offer a handful of change or a convenient check instead of inviting those who are unclean, those who are uncared for, those who are unclaimed, unwanted, underemployed if employed at all. Invite the other to truly join us at our table as members of our own family. And just like the brothers of the rich man, we will not get any other saving hand to try to persuade us beyond what we already have. We should not expect any special message or messenger to come down and point it out to us when we should offer a saving hand. None of us will get that, for we have something better. We have not just these parables that challenge us in ways that should and do make us squirm a bit. We have, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. We know that for Jesus, the parables with which he taught us, challenged us, and pulled us into, were not just stories. For Jesus, the parables were the true reality for those who would be his followers. Not reality TV, but reality. A life lived by this reality wasn't given the promise of easy living. And Jesus carried that message all the way to the cross and beyond. For as we were yet sinners, Jesus died for us, so that we might experience the reality of life lived within the grace of God. This is to be our reality even as we struggle with these stories, the lessons, and the life Christ gave us as an example. Jesus' parable points to something better for us, something better and something more real. The parable points to a reality that we were created not to be alone, but to be loved and to love. Not to be users of one another, but to be partners in the world. We were created to be in relationships. We were not created to dig chasms and let gulfs separate us. We were created and brought into our relationship with God through Christ to build bridges. For in truth, we are the five brothers, the brothers and sisters of the rich man still living, whom the rich man wishes to warn, to save from the torment of being on the wrong side of the chasm, the torment of being separated from God, the torment of being able to envision only using people, not loving them, the torment of ignoring the poor, not serving them. We are the five brothers. And in truth, all of us, each and every one of us, have people sitting by our gates, people who give us the opportunity to fulfill the promises of our baptismal covenant, promises to seek and serve Christ in all persons, to respect the dignity of every human being, and so become who we have been called to be, bridge builders. Bridge builders who can span the gulf that separates us one from another and thus build the relationship God desires for each one of us. Amen.